All right. And we are live. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I'm here today with a I think I'm gonna call you my friend, David. I think we're
Oh yeah,
I
we're
think we're
definitely
definitely
friends. Yeah.
definitely to that level. And I was thinking about it today because I think you're my most reoccurrent guest. So I
Oh
think you've been on
really?
3 times now.
Oh
Yeah.
wow, that's
Uh,
exciting.
the first time when I interviewed you and we talked a little bit about your spiritual experiences and atheism, and then of course on the panel that I had about religious experiences, and then
Yeah,
now this time.
that was a fun one. That religious experience panel. If anyone wants to go back and watch it, it was a hoot. Because essentially, because we had two, not to throw shade, because I love those guys, but
Yeah.
two theists who had completely different ideas of what and who and how God is, arguing with me as if they're on the same side. But I just kept pointing back that they disagreed. Like, so anyway, it was funny. I loved it.
Right.
It was actually a really good conversation.
Might have to do a round two of that
Mm,
sometime this year.
yeah.
So David, how about you just go ahead and introduce yourself again? Tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, that sort of thing.
Yeah, so my name is David McDonald. I run a podcast called Deep Drinks Podcast, where the guest chooses their drink and we drink it together. I get that same drink here in Australia, usually. Sometimes I can't get the exact same one. And we drink it, and the drink sets the tone. So sometimes I'm drinking vodka at 7 a.m., and sometimes I'm drinking coffee at 1 a.m. So depending on where my guest is. And the drink sets the tone, and we have deep conversations about deep topics, usually about religion, philosophy, and science. And sometimes stories about people's lives, like escaping cults or losing their family when they came out as gay or something like that.
Mhm.
Something that I find interesting personally, and yeah, we have a great time over there. I'm a former youth pastor, so the Pentecostal kind. So I spoke in tongues. I believed the end of the world was imminent. I laid hands on people um, for healing. I believe that I saw and witnessed miracles, and I was very much a firm believer in my faith, so much so that I would have died easily for my faith. Someone put a gun to my head, I would have taken a bullet, and now I no longer believe. So that's a wild journey. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
Yeah, and let me dote on you a little bit here because one of the things I really enjoy, and I'll link the Deep Drinks podcast in the description of this video. It's probably not probably, definitely one of my favorite shows out there. Simply, well, for one, David, you're a great interviewer. I don't know
Thank
if
you.
you know that about
I'm
yourself.
trying very hard. I'm trying very, very hard. But thank you.
But you actually you show up prepared, and not only prepared, but it's clear that you've done your homework when you interview your guests, so you're actually able to ask them questions that appeals to whatever their particular expertise or focus in,
Mm,
whatever they're focusing on, that allows them to kind of elaborate on that. And not only that, but your the range of people that you interview is, to me, what's most interesting, and
mm,
what kind of drew me to it, because you'll interview you know both you and I both are kind of loosely involved in the online atheist skeptic community,
hmm.
but you've had some really big name Christians on your podcast as well,
Yeah.
Christian
Yeah.
apologists. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's important because I think it's important to not only like give the best faith interpretation to some of the big problems around religion, or big not big problems, but the big questions around religiosity, philosophy, atheism. I think it's important to have those people on to discuss these issues because the whole reason I stopped. I'm not even going to use the word believe because that becomes like something your team, like you're I'm a believer. I'm on this team. So I just said the word convinced. So the whole reason I stopped being convinced of the evidence for the reasons that I had initially for believing in God or and the Bible is for reasons and evidence. So if someone can present me a good way of thinking or evidence or a reason or something that um, would get me to believe in a God, then I want to know. Like I want to. In the words of Matt Dillahunty, I want to believe as many true things and as little false things as possible, and that's my goal. So I think it's important to have people on that. You know, some people I have on, I can't even follow their worldview. It's so bizarre to me, and I won't mention people by names. But and I try really hard, and that's the thing is, you got to try really hard because, yeah, like I said, once I would have died for my faith, and now I don't believe that faith. So people can change their beliefs. Very strong belief people can change. And how do I know if I'm right now if I'm not always challenging it?
Right.
You know?
Right. And that's actually another thing I appreciate about you. And this will be the last compliment. I swear I'll stop and get into the actual. But this is another thing that I really enjoy about you personally is that you're, how to put it, intellectually honest and like openly curious, right? You're not the I was just having a conversation about this over dinner with somebody. You know, when you hear the word atheist, and we'll get into this a little bit more, but when you hear the word atheist, like usually the first thing that comes to mind is the Reddit neckbeard that, you know, smells of BO and is very like condescending and kind of, but you are the intellectual opposite of that.
Well,
right?
I hope so. Like, I appreciate the compliments. It feels awkward being complimented so much, but I do appreciate it. I am aiming for that. So if I'm getting anywhere near it, or if someone can pick that up, that's great. But yeah, thank you. I appreciate it.
And kind of building off of that and building off of what you were saying, one of the things I kind of wanted to open us up with to get your feedback on, how long have you been doing deep drinks now? Has it been a year? It's been a year, right?
It's so I started Deep Drinks probably just over a year ago, but on my David McDonald channel. And then I realized that was the only thing on my channel that had any form of consistency. So I moved it to its own channel. And since moving it to its own channel, it's been about 8 months, 9 months, or 10 months or something. About a year.
Okay. Let's start off with what has been your most, and you know, you don't have to name drop if you don't want to.
Yeah.
But speaking to what we were just talking about, though, who has challenged your belief system the most? Like, what has been the most intellectually engaging?
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to have to think about this one because there's the obvious, you know, like I've had Christians on and stuff. I think I'm just looking through the people I've had on. I get a lot. I get a little bit from everyone, to be honest. And a lot of my thinking actually changes prior to the interview because I'm doing research on them. So I'll spend a lot of time. Oh, actually, I know exactly which one. So I was very much. Yeah, this is. I can't believe I didn't think about this until I just saw it. I was very much hey, like, you know, Islam isn't that bad. You know, because, you know, there are lots of peaceful people in Islam, things like that. And I would fight back against the Christians. I still believe that. I still 100% believe that. However, I've come to see Islam, or not necessarily Islam, but the way Islam is implemented in some countries as directly against human rights. And that came from the Holy Humanist Nura Khan episode where she escaped. I think Dubai. I think it was Dubai. She was in Saudi Arabia for a little while, but she escaped there from the police in the nick of time, and she probably would have disappeared in the system.
Wow.
Because she was trying to leave her husband, and the courts were saying that she had jinns and things like that, and so her story really changed my perspective on how Islam can be used in such ways. Now, I want to preface that by saying I think Islam, the 99.9% of people in Islam and Islam can be a peaceful religion, because I think Muslims are just as hypocritical as Christians in that they don't follow everything that's in their Quran, and thank God that Christians don't follow everything that's in the Bible. Or thank Neil deGrasse Tyson, as I like to say. But that definitely shifted my perspective. Yeah, is just seeing the human rights violations that were happening on behalf of Islam and the Quran. Yeah.
Okay.
And that shifted my perspective in. I wanted deep drinks to become a lot less about. I got a lot less interest. I got a lot more interested in humanistic, like in human rights activism as well. So this year we're probably going to be doing some panels on Iran and women's rights, things like that. So bringing more things to light in the conversation around misogyny, human rights, women's rights, things like that.
Yeah, because you've also interviewed a number of people on issues of like the status and the relationship of women in the church, and this idea of like purity culture and stuff like that. Yeah.
So I was already pretty I had a huge hatred for purity culture, or I really didn't like purity culture. And the only thing that's happened there with interviewing people about it is I just dislike it even more. So it's just buried me further into that hole. So yeah.
Reinforce those ideas.
Yeah, definitely.
In terms of your atheism, has there been any guest that has given you pause, like, oh shit, maybe they're right, type of situation?
Yeah, I've thought about this. No, not really. So, but there have been perspectives that I never would have considered, that I have considered and still found even more preposterous since interviewing such people. Michael Jones of Inspiring Philosophy and I had a discussion around morals, not necessarily morals, but the problem of evil and the problem of suffering. And I asked the question, and you can go back and watch it. I asked the question if we were talking about like Lord of the Rings and talking about the concept of like morality being like we're talking about the concept of like God could have created this world where there's two buttons in a room. One gives $1,000 to charity and one gives $500 to charity. Both of those things are good things. One is just a little better than the other thing, right? And I was like, but he chose to create this world where there was another button that says little girl gets raped, and there are people that can press that button, and that was an issue for the problem of evil, right? Like, and we went right into it. I'm kind of skipping a lot of things, and he kind of brought it back to, because we started the conversation talking about Lord of the Rings, and he talked about I think it's like moral virtue, about like going over the hardship is what actually builds character and all those things. And he asked me, would I be interested in creating a room, like would I be interested in living in a universe where the only two options are give $1,000 to charity or give $500 to charity? Like the only options are good options. We still have free will, but the only things that we can do are mostly good. There is, and I said, yes, I would want to live in that world. And he said he wouldn't. And I said, well, would you want to live in the world where a little girl does get raped, but you have the option to choose good? Or would you rather live in a world where there's no little girl getting raped? Sorry to be so horrible, to talk about such horrible things. Straight to it. But he said, I'd rather live in the world where the little girl gets raped. And that was shocking to me. I didn't realize how strong his position on moral virtue was, that he would answer like that. Now, I've answered uncomfortable questions like that before, especially around, I remember you watched the live episode I did around the incest discussion with Muslims. So I've answered tough questions like that before. I was really stoked that Michael didn't duck and weave that. And I think that I'm probably giving a bad representation of his thoughts. So you'd have to go actually watch the interview yourself, because he probably says it better than how I'm remembering it. So, but it is an interesting thing that someone could, that I never would consider that anyone would make that decision. And so that gave me pause to think about, okay, well, moral virtue, like what is that? Like, is that worth investigating? And I did, and I was like, no, I'd still rather live in a world where it's only good, especially because that's like the heaven that they're chasing, right? Like nothing bad happens in heaven. So like, and that's like, we're going to be in heaven. And it's like, well, why couldn't we just live like that anyway?
Yeah. And I forgot, I got to say one more nice thing about you, or one more congratulatory thing about you. Last one, I promise. But you've also shared some news publicly, so I feel comfortable sharing it
Yeah,
here that you're about to be a father.
yeah,
So
yeah. It's
congratulations, David. That's amazing.
yeah, and I was looking for the footage. I couldn't find it, and it was probably inappropriate. But we went. My wife and I went through IVF, and we have the footage of the sperm hitting the egg and turning into multi
Mm,
cells and dividing under the microscope. It's crazy. Like we've got, how people do those like photos every day of their face morphing as they go through the years. We could do that
right.
from the egg. Like we could
Wow.
so it's really cool. And yeah, it was our first. We did 5 years of fertility treatment, and this is our first round of IVF. We didn't expect the results that we got, and yeah, now my wife is 6 days away from our due date. So
Wow.
yeah, very,
Well,
very excited about
congratulations. That's
that.
amazing.
Thank you. Thank you.
So let's get into it. And the general approach that I take with this topic, and surprisingly, I've had a number of atheists on my channel, but I haven't really taken this approach with them, and I wanted to take this approach with you. When I have somebody from a particular religious background, I'll kind of start as broad as possible, like big picture view from a mile up. These impossibly simple questions. So
Mhm.
my first question to you, David, what is atheism?
That's a that's a good question. So, um, atheism, in my perspective, is just not being convinced of the existence of a god or gods. That's it. That's all it is. Is a lot of people tend to use it. Usually, people who aren't atheists describe it as like this hard position that someone doesn't believe in God. Like they're like there is no God, where that isn't the case. And usually a lot of people who haven't thought about this at all will say, "I'm not an atheist, but I'm more agnostic." And it's funny because I feel like no one really knows the definition of these words. So yeah, so yeah, so I looked it up on the dictionary definitions. So atheism is a disbelief or lack of belief in the existence of God or gods, where agnosticism is even harsher. It's a person who believes that nothing is known or can be known of the existence of the nature of gods. Which is it's so funny that one is just saying, "Hey, I'm not convinced of your arguments for the existence of God," and the other one's saying, "No, you don't know about God." Yeah, and that's the
Mm,
so I find it's really interesting that people have kind of twisted the two a little bit. Now, people use them in different ways now, but yeah, I think that uh, I think that under my definition, if you're agnostic, you're also an atheist, and if you're an atheist, you're also agnostic, kind of. So,
mm.
yeah.
So, someone who doesn't believe in God or gods, let's unpack that a little bit.
Mm.
Does this include belief in the supernatural? Like, could you theoretically, and this is under your understanding of atheism,
Yeah, yeah.
like, could you see yourself ever believing in something like, I don't know, a haunted house, to use a silly example, or maybe not
Yeah.
a silly example, but
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Absolutely. So the atheism is just an answer to one question, and that question is there a God? And then someone says, I believe there is, here's the evidence, and then the other person says, I don't think that's good enough evidence. That's all atheism is. So you can believe in fairies, Loch Ness monster, Bigfoot, haunted house, like none of that, ghosts, anything like that, and not believe in a God. Yeah,
Mhm.
because it's different. However, I think that for the most a lot of the time when someone comes to identify as an atheist, and when I say identify as an atheist, I mean becoming part of this this movement, this zeitgeist, this concept that we have as of an atheist online, they usually arrive for rationality, for reasons of rationality, in which case most of the time a lot of those other things are excluded.
Okay.
Mm. So if you say, "Oh, I don't think there's sufficient evidence for a god," and maybe your evidence for that god is you were brought up believing it, experience some feelings or some intense emotional responses when attending a church or a prayer meeting or something. And you prayed after your grandmother died and you felt peace and love. Well, and then you come to the understanding that maybe that isn't good evidence for the existence of God. Maybe they were just emotional experiences, or maybe they were just something that I went through. Or you can use that same thing for ghosts. Well, when I was scared as a kid and I looked out the window and I thought I saw something, maybe that I didn't see something, or maybe, and you can use those same justifications to arrive at a different perspective, like a different perspective.
Would you say then that from your position, that belief in God, would you chalk this up, and maybe chalk this up is not the right phrase there, but would you say that this more has to do with sort of a human psychological desire, or our belief, maybe the fear of death, escape of death, fear of what happens after death? Or do you think that, let me rephrase that, scratch that. Do you think that people can have good reasons to believe in God?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure that they could. Yeah, I just haven't heard any that have convinced me. I think that there's two issues as well. There's positions like God in general, like theistic perspectives of God, but people tend to take them and then jump to whatever God belief they grew up with or they're fond of. So I think there's a huge problem there. But I think maybe, there possibly is good reasons to believe in a God, and that's what I tend to look for on my channel and in my own personal studies. I've got the Blackwell's Companion to Natural Theology. Yeah, it's a natural theology back there. I'm too scared to open it. But it's just a big book,
it's a little thick. Yeah.
And there's no audible version either. So so definitely. But it's there, and I'm always looking for those reasons, because I will change my mind with sufficient evidence.
Yeah, and that seems to be that's a big deal, and that's kind of ties back into this. What I like about your intellectual curiosity, I'm complimenting you again, but because it seems that a prerequisite for some of the people that I've spoken with on my channel that are more religiously inclined, this is a difficult thing for theists to admit sometimes. Because I'll ask this question. I think I asked this question in that panel you were a part of, right? What would it take to convince you that you're wrong? What would it take for a theist to convince you, David?
That's a good one. That's a good question. I was asked this by a street preacher in Brisbane, who I asked if they'd come on Deep Drinks a few times, and they've said no. But they asked me, what would convince you of the existence of God? And I didn't really have a good answer. And they said, well, if you don't know what would convince you, how could you ever be convinced, kind of thing. And I think that's a silly idea anyway. But I went away and thought about it a little bit more and come up with a snidey little, bit of sophistry. But it is interesting to think about. I'm going to say it anyway. So the same thing that would convince me of the existence of the God of the Bible is the same thing that I would need to be convinced of a married bachelor. So that is like there are issues with the continuity of the biblical God, so much so that those would have to be resolved before I could believe that it was plausibly true. So there is a way, like, so if someone could convince me that the resurrection did happen and it was ordained and it was a God thing, I don't know how you do, even if the resurrection did happen, I don't know how you get from that to it is, and that was commanded by God. Let's say you did get that. There would still be all the issues in the Bible that you need to clear up. And apologists try and do this. And funny enough, you ask an apologist why they started believing in God or why they believe in God, and they'll tell you all these reasons. Almost every time I've asked, none of those are the reasons they started believing in God. They're just the reasons they now give to defend it. So you got to ask, why do they start believing in God? I grew up Christian, I had this experience, like whatever. Like now that it's like, oh, there are holes in this, let's find solutions. I think not to go on a tangent too much, but I think the existence of apologetics is almost like the smoking gun to the existence of God in the first place. A God shouldn't need to be, you shouldn't need to do complicated maths or go to Moody Bible Institute to be convinced of a God if that God wanted you to believe in that God, you know? Anyway, so what was your initial question? Sorry.
No, it's all good. The question was, what would it take to convince you that God exists?
Yeah. So I guess logic, reason, and it's like something that would okay, so I guess maybe it might be good to explain how I build my worldview, and then we could jump forward to that, because that'll kind of explain that a little bit. So you asked me in the pre-questions, like, what, does atheism, what does atheism need defending, or like how do you defend atheism? I don't think atheism needs defending. I think atheism is a necessary starting point. No one starts believing in fairies and then goes looking for the evidence. Someone tells you about fairies, and then you go, oh, I either do believe or don't believe, and let's go look for the evidence. So you start this life as an atheist. You don't know anything. You don't know anything about anything. You don't know 1 + 1 = 2. You don't know really anything. You start this life as an atheist, and then you get taught things, and that's like the next step. So I think atheism, not belief, is the necessary starting position. But that's not necessarily what people are asking when they ask, like, how do you support atheism? So it's more about like, how do I build my worldview? So I wrote down a few steps. So step 1, this is how I build my worldview, and I've thought about this for years. I start from a position of presupposing as little as I can, and we can stop and talk about all these. So, I don't assume that. I try and assume as little as possible, right? I don't come in loaded with like, well, there must be a God, so therefore let's go look for the evidence, or there must be ghosts, or I try and assume as little as possible. So, but there are a few things that I can't justify logically, right? I can't justify with my rationale, which is that I exist, the universe exists, and that we make observations of this universe. I think it was, I'm getting to the philosophy memes, but who was it that said, was it Kant that said, oh no, it was Descartes, he said, I think, therefore I am. Yeah, I don't agree necessarily. I think that I think therefore it's likely that I am, or whatever. But like, that's a whole different thing. But I can't justify the fact that I exist, the universe exists, and then I can make observations of that universe. So I start there. That's just the basic beliefs. I think it's called you could tell me, it's the proper basic beliefs in philosophy. Maybe I'm getting it wrong, but that's it. Cool. Mm-hmm. And then I examine the evidence for any particular claim. So I go into anything major. Now, if I'm ordering like fish and chips, I'm not running these calculations for dinner or whatever. I just do what my wife says. But if I'm investigating a claim, was 9/11 an inside job? Do vaccines cause autism? Is there a God? Do ghosts live in my basement? Like things like that. I examine the evidence of any particular claim using logic and reason and the scientific method, which I think is the best tool that we have for examining the natural world. So how do I determine? So then after I make that investigation, how do I determine which is the most likely scenario? So, and for me, it's the hypothesis or theory that produces the most unique or novel testable predictions that return true. So that's a bit of a mouthful, but I'll say it again. The hypothesis and theory that can produce the most unique, such novel testable predictions, I tentatively accept as most likely true if they return true. So this is like a bit of complicated jargon, but I'll give you a couple of examples. So the first example is the cosmic microwave background radiation, right? So actually, I'll give you an example of something that isn't a novel testable prediction, okay? Something that isn't a novel testable prediction is dog kinds produce dog kinds, okay? That's what Kent Hovind likes to say. Well, the Bible says that dog kinds produce dog kinds. Therefore, dogs are, the Bible is accurate. Okay, that's not novel. Everyone can see a dog kind produces a dog kind. That's not novel or unique or something, right? Something that is that I found super interesting was the cosmic microwave background radiation. Now, I've read a book on this. It was a while ago. I might be butchering some of the terminology, but essentially, when they first started building the hypothesis for the Big Bang Theory, or like the theories behind it, they were like, hey, the physicists and mathematicians stuff, like, hey, there should be this leftover radiation from the Big Bang. There should be what they call the cosmic microwave background radiation. And they're like, wrote in their papers, they said it should look like this. They had like exact like numbers for what it should look like based on the Big Bang model. They went away. They couldn't find it. They couldn't predict it. They couldn't see it. They couldn't do anything. I think it was 15 to 25 years later, some other scientists were running a different experiment, and they're like, they're building new technology for it. And they're like, we keep getting this interference on our satellites, like on our dishes. We can't, this is so annoying. We can't, they thought it was bird droppings. They tried to scrape it off. They thought there was some issues with the electronics of the satellite. So they couldn't work out why they're getting this interference until they went back and they read some of these old scientific papers, and they thought maybe this is actually that cosmic microwave background radiation. And they measured it, and they were like, okay, this looks tentatively on the right page. They sent a satellite into orbit so they could get away from Earth's interference. They measured it, and it came out exactly, like 100%. I'll show you. I don't know if you can post this image. I'll post it in the if you could open that. The mathematical formulas and what the physicists came up with was exactly the same as what they measured in the real world. So for that to be a coincidence would be incredibly, like, it would be like unfathomably wild, which tells me that whatever parts of the model of the Big Bang cosmology that they were using is at the time, that it has to be like accurate, because it produced a novel testable prediction. So you see the little points there, the red points. They're one of them is the mathematical formula written 15-25 years before they had the technology to find it. And then you can't even see the error margins. The red are what they actually measured. So for the Big Bang Theory to be inaccurate would be just wild, right? Like it's produced novel testable predictions. Something else, and this is for evolution. So there's Tiktaalik. I'm sure everyone knows about Tiktaalik. So the theory of evolution by natural selection says that all life came from a common ancestor, that we all share a DNA that went back to a single cell organism 3.4 billion years ago, or some amount of years ago. I'm not good with dates. So I'm going to explain this really in terms I can understand, because I'm a bit of a dummy, but fossil so fossil X and fossil Z. Okay, we have fossil X, we have fossil Z. Fish thing, crawling thing. There must be a fossil Y of an intermediate between these two in the geologic column, the strata. And they're like, okay, so we know that fossil Y lives at this strata, and we know fossil Z lives in this strata. Therefore, in fossil, X and Y, Z, therefore, the one in between, there should be an intermediate if it survived, right? Because it's really hard to find fossils. Where on Earth is this strata available to dig up, like is open to the natural air? And they looked around the Earth. Oh, there's a spot in Canada. They spent 3 years. They flew over to Canada. They spent 3 years of huge trips trying to find this fossil that it didn't exist. Like no one knew it was there. And sure enough, bam, they dig it up. Tiktaalik, perfect intermediate between fossil Z and fossil X. There doesn't get much more novel and unique than, I think we'll find this fossil here that no one's ever seen or heard of or existed, and then they go and dig it up and it is here. So for the Big Bang Theory, or for common descent to be inaccurate, would be a wild coincidence. Very, very wild. So those two things, I go, okay, they increase my confidence in the Big Bang Theory and evolution. Now, I'm always open to change my mind if someone can explain to me maybe why that evidence actually it wasn't accurate, or maybe that the model didn't predict the things I did. Great, whatever. But at this stage, it's almost no one doesn't accept that those things were in the model and then were found. So that's how I analyze the big questions, and anything that doesn't have an answer yet, I just admit we don't have an answer yet for, right? Like people say like, oh, we used to think the Earth is flat. Well, I think that the people who did think the Earth was flat were just assuming things with not enough information. We didn't know the Earth was flat because we couldn't. There's no way to measure it. It could have been an assumption, sure, but like if you really get down to brass tacks and look at it, it's like, well, you need to have like evidence in one way or another, or at least be able to produce novel testable predictions. So abiogenesis, why did the first single cell organisms start? Where did non-living matter turn to living matter? Well, we have some working hypothesis, like the RNA world hypothesis. It's mostly been like disproven, but we have proved that it can happen, but it's most likely not how it happened. But we don't have an answer yet, so we don't know. That's it. Why did the Big Bang Theory happen? Is that even a sensible question to ask? Did like it happening, or like why did it start? We don't know. I don't know why it happened, but that's the answer, and that's not satisfying for a lot of people. So I think that's why we get stories, like religious stories. Yeah. So we don't even know if those questions are sensible, but I just go, we don't know, and so that looking for that reason, like looking for the reasons for the Big Bang, like why did the Big Bang happen, or where did the first life come from, is much more exciting to me than going, God did it and it was magic. He wiggled his nose and shift his tail around and then pop. Like it just, yeah. So that's how I build my worldview.
Gotcha. No, I appreciate that, especially laying out in steps. So let me give you, let me not necessarily push back on it, but it sounds like what you're saying would be applicable to a very kind of narrow, maybe not narrow, but a specific type of theism, right? What about, and maybe this is what you mean and understand by atheism, but it sounds like specifically what you have in mind is the Judeo-Christian Islamic God.
Yeah. Well, so the two examples I gave kind of pull apart the 6-day creation account and things like that. So yeah, sure, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I've rejected. I want to be clear. I'm not rejecting the Bible or the Quran or whatever because of this evidence. I'm looking at the evidence that they produce, which is accounts written thousands of years after the fact in very poetic language about things that, like, about Adam and Eve living at the same time that whole dynasties were rising and falling around the world. So, so it's not necessarily that that's not necessarily why I reject certain types of theism. It's just the way that I go about thinking about things. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. So it doesn't necessarily serve as your rejection of the entirety of the religion itself. You would kind of take that on a case by case basis, I assume.
So say, let's say I don't know about Christianity, I don't know about Judaism, Islam, or Hinduism, or anything like that, any type of religion. Let's say I'm a new person born into the Matrix or something. I don't know much about stuff, and someone comes up to me and says, "Do you believe in God?" And I say, "What do you mean?" Right? Like, and they describe the God of classical theism, or they describe the first mover, or they describe the Kalam cosmological argument and stuff. They're nice ideas, but I just don't think they, like, I think they're missing steps. So we can go into them a little bit, but even at that level, I'm not convinced of those arguments. I think that they're, for lack of a better word, cute. Like they're fun, and if you really want to believe them, they could work. But I don't think they should be taken as seriously as a lot of people do take them seriously.
So let's go down the route of the I kind of have two thoughts in mind here, and hopefully I don't forget my second one. But the two thoughts are one is the theist who utilizes natural theology to make arguments for the existence of God based off of things like fine tuning or the Kalam cosmological argument, or maybe the creationist that argues for the complexity of life points to the existence of God. And then on the other hand, I want to ask you about the type of person who would say that, who would accept everything that you just said, say like, of course, science represents an accurate depiction of the world as we know it, but who is still like vaguely spiritual, so to speak, who would say that, like, yes, but and God type of situation. Let's start with the first person. Is it that you mentioned like the Kalam cosmological argument? What about those types of arguments do you find not convincing? Like,
so the Kalam is whatever begins to exist had a cause of its existence. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe had a cause of its existence. So
word for word, I think that's it.
Okay, cool. I looked it up for the discussion I had yesterday with Seth Andrews, which was amazing episode, by the way. I really enjoyed talking with him on Deep Drinks. But that so the first thing, whatever began to exist has a cause of its existence. Well, I don't know that. Like that's so first of all, I go, okay, everything that we've examined, like I've examined in this, like, what is it, 32 years on Earth, and everything that I understand, sure, like that course, that makes sense, right? Mm-hmm. But I don't know if that's a sensical, and once again, I'm not a physicist and I'm not a philosopher, but I don't know if that's a sensical thing to even ask when it comes to Big Bang. Like, was the Big Bang caused? I don't know. Like, wasn't time created at the start of the Big Bang? Like, it doesn't make it, to me, it's like, if it was caused and time started then, it doesn't make any sense for it to then, how can something be caused if there was no time? I don't know if it's even a sensical question. Also, I read a book on quantum mechanics, and tiny little book, pop culture kind of book. Halfway through, despite trying as hard as I couldn't understand what the F they were talking about. And I just had to assume everything they were saying was true. And go, okay, that's interesting, but I couldn't follow along anymore. And this is a pop science culture book, right? So pop science book on quantum mechanics. It's like, okay, well, there are a lot of things that I don't understand about Big Bang cosmology, about the creation of like how this universe became to exist. I don't even know if stating whatever begins to exist has a cause of its existence is even a sensical question at that level. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like, I can push a rock down the hill. Sure, that has a cause and everything, and like there's a cause that made me want to do that. But I don't know, once you get to that level of fundamental concepts, I don't know if that makes sense anymore. And it's me being, to use a butchered terminology that we used before, it's me being agnostic. I don't know. Maybe I'll look into it and I will discover, actually, yeah, this makes sense. But at the moment, I don't know. And no one's been able to explain that to me because I don't think anyone actually has the answer. It just seems the most reasonable based on how we currently understand our current circumstances. It's like playing Mario and going, oh, you can jump around, and then going to play Zelda and being like, well, of course you can jump around. It's a video game. It's like, well, they're different video games. Like, it doesn't make, it's very, I don't even know if it makes sense, Mm-hmm. And it's like going to play Zelda, but not even knowing what Zelda is, or not even knowing how to, like, what is a Zelda? It's like, it's beyond even being able to investigate at this stage. They're just what I say, cute ideas. I'm going to get butchered for this, and I hope that I hope a Christian calls me out and I go on their channel and William Lane Craig, come for me, baby.
Dr. Craig, if you would like to debate David, you're more than welcome. So, and this the second person I bring up, the reason why I bring it up is precisely because what you were talking about earlier, it seems to me directed at a certain type of belief. So or certain type of theism, I should say.
Mm.
So, like, what would you say? And maybe you wouldn't say anything to this person, but hypothetically, somebody who's maybe, I have in mind here, like a non-fundamentalist Christian, like
Mhm.
maybe somebody who has a let's say very progressive understanding of God and spirituality and is very inclusive, and would say that the actions of God are synonymous with the laws of nature, and that God created through evolution, and that maybe God has not always existed. Maybe the universe is equivalent to God, like some sort that loosely speaking kind of religious language. And yeah, how would you respond to that? Is what you're saying in conflict with that, or would you just kind of be like, yeah, that's cool type of situation?
Well,
Like,
yeah, I've actually thought about that. I don't. Yeah, if someone describes like God in that way, or describes like cool, like yeah, okay, like I guess I'm a theist now. Like I don't know.
I
I
guess.
don't. You know what I mean? Like I don't know. To me, it's like an unnecessary label, I guess. But at the same time, I'm not necessarily opposed to it. I just think, okay,
Mhm.
like if you call whatever, so like another argument is like the first the finely like a finely tuned argument or something. Like let's say instead of God, let's say the maths of the universe that put into effect the Big Bang, right? And let's say hypothetically, which is impossible for me to kind of wrap my head around, but let's say all there was that maths, that one formula that's always been the beginning and the end, the alpha and the omega, that maths, right? That like little if you want to call that God, okay, I call it God. Right? I guess that but all we're really doing at that stage is we're playing I won't say semantic tricks, but we're just trying to describe ways or like thoughts in our head to each other. That's all we're doing. So I mean, if we were both like taking shrooms or smoking weed and having stoner conversations around a fire, like yeah, I could get on board with like calling whatever that is God, but I don't necessarily think that it matters very much. Like I don't think it means a lot. You know what I mean?
Hmm. Hmm.
We see a lot of people will sneak that in. They'll sneak that in as a way of like I've had debates with on my main channel, not Deep Drinks, on Dave McDonald, but my channel where when Muslims, I've had debates with Muslims on TikTok about that, where they try and sneak in that conclusion. Like they try and sneak in everything had to have a cause. There's infinite regress. Something had to have a cause, and and I don't. Once again, I don't know if that's the case, but like, if you were to grant that, then they tend to just jump. Okay, well then, therefore, let's look at all the gods on the earth, and let's work out which one is the most reliable. And I think that's like fallacy in itself. Um, it's that jump that I think is powered purely by the emotional need for someone to connect whatever God belief they already have for different reasons to some complicated thought experiment. And I think it's fun to have those complicated thought experiments about maybe that maths is God, or maybe the universe is God or something. But I think when you make that jump, that's when it becomes very fallacious. I think otherwise it's just semantics.
Mm, gotcha. Do you see any major objections to atheism, or major objections to the position that there is no God or gods? Like, if you come across an argument that and well, obviously not an argument that you think works, or else you wouldn't be an atheist, but uh, like, what do you think the best argument for that would be?
Yeah, so it's funny you asked when you asked this in the pre-questions. I actually thought about it because I was a little embarrassed that I didn't have a good answer for this. I started wondering, am I being caught too much in like a circle jerk of like atheists online who all think they have all the answers or something? I got a little bit concerned, but for me, like I said before, atheism isn't a proposition; it's a lack of position. So atheism is a belief system like abstinence is a sex position, is the best way I like to describe it, right? Like, so, but I did reach out to Michael Jones, he's a friend of mine, been on the
nice.
show, Inspiring Philosophy, and I said, I asked him the same question, and he said, honestly, my biggest objection is that there is simply too much evidence for God. Theism is just more parsimonious, and atheism leaves too much unexplained that can easily be accounted for with theism. Yeah, so I disagree with that very much so. I think that, but that's what his opinion was. So for my opinion, I think that in defense of atheism, I think atheism doesn't need defending. I think atheism is just the starting point. I think that it's not the pro position, it's the position of, please help me believe what you believe. If you believe in God or fairies or unicorns or magic, give me a reason for believing in those things, not the other way around. Like, I don't have to go around and explain why there is no Bigfoot. You have to explain to me why there is Bigfoot. I don't have the burden of proof.
And you don't accept the overwhelming evidence for God either. You don't see that.
Well, what do you? Well, give me an example of some overwhelming evidence, and I'll tell you if I accept it.
Well, so Michael's statement specifically, and I just heard that little snippet that you provided me. So I hope I'm not taking this out of context.
Simply too much evidence of God. Yeah.
Yeah. Because here's a thing that I've noticed, and I would like to get your response to this.
Yeah.
It's very easy, and I was just having a conversation with a student about this with respect to, and I don't know if this will make any sense, but this was I taught a class on conspiracy theories, and I said that one of a lot of great discussion, but one of the issues that one of the common, like, logical issues that I see with conspiratorial thinking specifically is they like to so you have like a commonly accepted narrative, such as, the narrative about what happened in September 11th in the United States. And conspiracy theorists will like to say, well, what about this fact? Or what about this fact? Or what about this fact? And they present, if we can kind of categorize the two types of evidence into positive evidence and negative evidence, most conspiratorial thinking is negative in the sense that it's a questioning of the standard narrative, which has its place, right? Sometimes we should and ought to question the standard narrative, and sometimes that narrative may not be coherent or make sense. But at some point, if you're going to make a claim about something, you brought up this idea of burden of proof, and maybe this is inherently, like, outside of the realm for atheism based off of your definition. But if I'm going to make the claim that Bigfoot exists, it doesn't do me much good to provide a bunch of negative evidence, right? What you're looking for in order to be convinced is hair samples, stool samples, a body, right? You're looking for something tangible. And for theistic arguments, we have historically some positive arguments for the existence of God. The ontological argument, the moral argument, the cosmological argument, the fine-tuning argument. We don't really have that for atheism. And what I'm wondering is can we chalk that up to simply being because atheism is just a lack of belief?
Yeah.
Like, what's the deal there?
I just realized that that makes atheism sound like the conspiracy theorists of the.
I didn't mean to present it that way. Yeah,
I hate conspiracy theorists, especially QAnon. Fuck those people. Sorry, I shouldn't swear. Okay. I'm a little triggered. So I think that's a good point. So are you saying that? Are you saying that there were these common accepted ideas that were presenting positive evidence for a God, and then the skeptics or the atheists are kind of coming in and saying, and presenting, well, that doesn't make sense, that doesn't make sense, that doesn't make sense, that doesn't make sense.
I don't want to draw too big of an analogy here, right? Because all that I'm saying is you have positive and negative evidence. And it seems like, although we might have some issues with theistic arguments, that they are still presenting a positive argument for God, right? So is there a positive argument for God's non-existence?
For God, yeah. I don't know. Well, maybe there might be. I think that you could build a positive argument based on. I could, from my worldview, based on what I've expressed here, like, this is how I think that is the best way to investigate claims. This is how we should investigate claims. This is why it's reliable. And therefore, let's investigate claims. I investigate this claim. I find no evidence for it. So you could kind of build a worldview for it. I just haven't done that because I haven't done that yet because I've taken the position that atheism is the necessary starting point. But that's interesting. I wonder if there would be some benefit to creating a pro-atheistic worldview, like a hypothesis, a theory of, like, I guess actually I might be getting a bit lost, but isn't that essentially the Enlightenment? Like, I'm 500 years too late or whatever. Like, how in hell when did the Enlightenment happen? That's what the Enlightenment was, wasn't it?
Yeah. So I mean, I do think you're on to something, which is why I asked the question initially. And we do have some comments here from a philosopher friend of mine. The argument from evil would be a good example of a argument that limits what sort of God could exist.
Yeah. Actually, Michael Jones mentioned that as an argument for against the existence of God as on his when I first had him on.
Yeah. And this is what you were kind of getting at is kind of what you and I talked about when I was on Deep Drinks, which is this idea of provisional naturalism. But yeah, it would, on your end, and you correct me if I'm wrong here, but what I could see happening there, you're saying that you take this position because of evidence. So you wouldn't necessarily need positive arguments per se, because what you're saying is the evidence available to you isn't kind of getting to that point or leading to that picture anyway. Mostly because of the testability, the verifiability, the predictability of these sorts of claims have led you to lead credence to these types of claims. And you're not necessarily seeing that from, let's say, the cosmological argument.
But I also, just to critique my position a little bit more, I think I've heard people make arguments that you won't find evidence for God. It's not something tangible. You're not going to find God in a test tube. And that my approach focuses too much on naturalism, methodological naturalism, but naturalism in general. And I don't understand why that's an issue, because I don't see evidence for, and this is me being honest and open, I don't see evidence for a reason why that isn't still the best way to investigate the world, is assuming naturalism and assuming, not assuming, but looking for things in the natural realm. But there could be an argument that I haven't heard yet for why we should reject naturalism and why we should kind of look for God outside of test tubes and telescopes. But once again, that would only be if you assume the God hypothesis in the first place. Because why even start that investigation if what you've got is just holy books, written for the last 1% of, not even that, 1% of human species existence, about gods that all contradict each other. You know,
Mhm.
why, or like people's personal beliefs, or it seems much more likely that someone that these communities created these like stories and concepts as a way of building community, continuing tradition, explaining their place in the cosmos, things like that.
Mhm. So, moving on to the final question I wanted to ask you, and you interpret this in whichever way you want, because speaking of things that theism may or may not have and atheism doesn't have, there's not really a strong sense of community in atheism, and there's not
Mm.
really a strong sense of like group identity. I mean, you get uh, maybe certain pockets of the internet, but there's this growing YouTube atheist slash agnostic community, and you've had a lot of those big figures. I don't know if we really have any like rock stars in the atheist community, but you've had a lot of those figures on your channel. I was wondering if you could kind of generally reflect on the state of atheism in 2023. Like, where do you see it? Where do you see it going? What are maybe some of the cultural trends that you've observed here?
Mm. I've thought about this a lot. There is a huge, um, I think the online atheists, I think everything to do around this question is in a transitional phase. So you had like at the start of I think it was the new atheism movement. You had like Sam Harris, uh, Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens, and they were like they were like
Mhm.
a certain segment. Uh, then it seems like the next for at least for me, and I don't have stats or anything for this, but it seems like those people were. I mean, like you can look at some of Christopher Hitchens' statements on women, and they're just deplorable. Richard Dawkins has been called out for what looks like transphobic remarks. I'm not necessarily convinced. I haven't looked too much into it. You know, I don't know a lot of people who love Sam Harris as much as they used to. They seem to have kind of fallen a little bit by the wayside. And then there was like the Matt Delahunty's, the Aaron Ra's, the Atheist Experience, that kind of community that grew. And now, you know, we're moving into a transitional stage where, you know, Matt Delahunty has left the ACA, or been asked to leave the ACA, which was crazy. Dark Matter finished his huge series of like many years, and it seems like the angry debate bro atheist online. Not to say that Matt or anyone was like that, but that era is kind of coming to an end. But what you're also seeing is you're seeing the debate bros pop up on the other side of the fence. So you've got the Ben Shapiro's, who say facts don't care about your feelings, which I wish someone would say to him that facts don't care about your religion either. Um, just because, you know, like he loves to slam everyone, but then he believes in his book with, you know, anyway. And then we've got Jordan Peterson, who you ask him
Mhm.
like if he believes in God, and it says it's going to take him 4 days to answer that simple yes or no question. And you've got masses of people who, I guess, flock to these people for like the narrative of the pushing back against the kind of atheist side of things. The atheist side of things have become very left centered. Now I'm left myself, but they've become. I think the atheist online space has become a little bit toxic, a little bit too. I don't know many right wing atheists, you know, I mean, that are part of the community. It's like you're a lefty or you're out kind of thing. I try to be inclusive of even right wing people, but those horrible people. But you know, but so I think that there's been a bit of a transition stage. I remember someone asked on Facebook, you know, what are some good books on philosophy, and or what are some really good books that, you know, I can read, and I said God Is Not Great by Christopher Hitchens, and everyone like laughed at me. Like, not, I don't think any of these people believed in God, but they were like, "Oh, I'm so over the whole God conversation." I think in the general zeitgeist of things, it's not really something that like people are kind of sick of that conversation in regards to, the angry atheist kind of tearing down religion. It's like, yes, it's been torn down like a million times over now. But we are seeing some really cool things. So we're seeing like new faces like Skeptic I've had on the channel. He's awesome. And some of the absolute best education around history, mythology, religion in Myth Vision. I mean, Derek produces like a video a day almost, just from some of the leading experts in religious studies from around the world. It's just incredible. And he's not necessarily an atheist channel, but he has such diversity that atheists and Christians and Buddhists and Hindus and Muslims can all watch it and find something interesting in it. And I think that's where atheist discourse is kind of going, in that I think people are more coming together. A lot of people in my Discord have different perspectives on faith. One of my Discord mods is a Christian. Like we're having conversations that are not more about kind of coming together and having conversations rather than pulling it apart. And I think that the people who are angry and calling everyone racist or misogynist are a dying part of the atheist community. Not saying that's a good thing or a bad thing. I just think that's kind of where the trends seem to be going. Talking about people calling people racist and misogynist, the lead pipe of accountability, Heathen Queen, just to make my point, has been blocked, or not blocked, but like accounts being suspended on Twitter. So, I mean,
I didn't know that.
I love Jessica, like absolutely love her. Don't necessarily agree with a lot of her approaches. However, she does her thing. That's cool. But you can even see that like she's now getting like kind of booted off Twitter for, I guess, like being the lead pipe of accountability. And I think that's just something that we're just going to see more and more of. I don't know whether that's a good thing or a bad thing at the moment, but yeah.
Gotcha. No, I appreciate that rundown. That's really interesting. So,
and also, I have to mention this. We're seeing a lot of Muslim and Christian apologists who are going everywhere and saying really that we see a lot of Muslim and Christian apologists creating channels and producing evidence for and proof of their God's claims. And a lot of the time, these people will not engage. They will not engage with people who can ask seriously hard questions that will make their faith look bad. And I think a lot of these people, not all of them, and this is why I like Michael Jones, because I don't think Michael Jones is too much like this. I think a lot of them are bad faith actors, and they won't engage with you on certain topics. And some of them are trolls, like Capturing Christianity. He loves to just drop in lines on Twitter saying, by the way, God is real or whatever, and then he won't engage with anyone's comments, and they'll ask him to come on Deep Drinks a few times. Capturing Christianity is one of those people, I would say. And I wish he would engage with people that would actually challenge his beliefs or hold him to account for some of the things that he says, because I think that's where the interesting conversations are, but he just doesn't seem to be interested. So you see a lot of that with the Muslim community and the Christian community. Muslims are overtaking TikTok Muslim apologists. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. It's amazing. Like everywhere you go. I also, before we wrap up, I also needed to shout out something. So Dr. I Dare You said before that loves the video game analogies. I have to shout out my, I have a gaming channel where I've been playing Zelda. I'll just link it in the chat. If anyone wants to come on, it's a hoot. Yeah.
Darren's a colleague of mine that plays video games and teaches classes based off of video game narratives and stuff. So yeah, I'm sure he would get a kick out of that. He's got a gaming channel as well if y'all are interested.
Oh, cool. I'll check it out.
So David, one last time, tell everybody where they can find you, if you've got any upcoming episodes or projects you want to throw out there.
Yeah, I guess I can, I'll put my my link in the chat, but we have coming up this week, we have Holy Kool-Aid Thomas Westbrook coming on to talk about miracles. Why doesn't God heal amputees? So that's going to be a good one. That he recently released a video on this very topic, and it really spoke to me on a very deep level. Why doesn't God heal amputees? And I have some personal stories about that as well. So that's going to be really interesting. And then I'm talking to someone who I haven't announced yet, but they will be coming on to talk about leaving a Hasidic Jewish cult. I don't even know what those words mean, but it'll be interesting to do the research to learn more about it. And so, yeah, that coming up next week is Thomas Westbrook. You can find me on Deep Drinks. We've also been doing some Deep Drinks panels this year. And of course, you can check out my gaming channel at Stripey and my other channel at David McDonald 89, I think, or David McDonald. Anyway, I'm all there. I'm there. If you want to find me, and also there's the Discord. But hey, come hang out.
And I'll link all those in the description after this video gets posted. Well, thanks again, David. I really appreciate it. I'm sure I'll have you on at least a few more times this year.
I'd love to. Absolutely.
We'll make it happen. Yeah, thanks again for taking time out of your day to come talk to me.
Cool. Thank you.
All right. Y'all have a good night. See y'all later.